Hello, everybody. Very excited to have my next guest on the show, Nicole Florisi. She is a law enforcement subject matter expert with an extensive background in law enforcement, including working with Force Science and all kinds of other accolades. She now works for VirTra. Nicole, thank you for being here. We just had a whole conversation before we even hit record.
We did. It was really good too. It's unfortunate everybody missed out on it.
Now, I know your law enforcement background, but for the listener out there, Nicole, tell them a little bit about your background, because it's significant. You got some badass training. You got some pretty cool training.
Yes, obviously I have a background in law enforcement, 22 years as a sworn officer. I did have communications background prior to that. But I decided I was going to have to retire at some point, and I still want to help people, as cliche as that may sound to anybody.
That's very important.
I'm all about that. So my background is in professional counseling. So I have a master's in counseling. I've worked as a therapist. My preference is like crisis and high suicidality and stuff like that. I'm very comfortable with that population. So, but I can work wherever, adult, youth, whatever that is. I have 2 postmaster's degrees. I have one in trauma counseling. I have one in human factor psychology. And then I'm currently working on my PhD in clinical psychology.
You have enough degrees?
No, and I don't necessarily believe that degrees make the person, but by God, it definitely helps you in expert witness testing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things you work on with VirTra is de-escalation,
yes,
right? Resiliency, mental health. I want to talk about those areas, if we can, and how VirTra aids in that. De-escalation, we see it all over the news today. You see this latest, we were talking about this latest unfortunate incident in law enforcement. De-escalation. How can officers de-escalate better, if that makes sense? You know what I mean? How do you approach it as an expert?
So first off, I do definitely want to say this. I don't think that we're bad at de-escalation. I already think we're really great at it. So
no, I think we are too, but as well as I do, there are some instances where officers should have de-escalated.
Yeah, that's a narrow window. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think that's a very tough thing to say broadly, because
that's why you're the expert,
right? What was their decision-making process? What was going through their mind? I mean, there's all sorts of things that factor in, one, the ability to de-escalate, but I really want to, for the audience, I really want you to think about de-escalation a little differently. And one thing is that there's nothing, how should I put this? You're not de-escalating anyone. Mm-hmm. You're providing the space for them to do it themselves. And I think really needs to be out there, because if someone really doesn't get that, they're going to assume when we show up, we have these tools and take the best train. I mean, you are very, very kind about my background. I am a great communicator, but I can assure you, sitting right here, I can't de-escalate everyone. If you want, and there's air quotes.
Good point. Yeah.
If you're on just audio only, because you cannot mandate, policy, demand, or hope that another human being can connect with someone else. It's a participatory process. The foundation for connection has to actually exist. So
and there is in the problem, probably.
Yes. Yeah. And we don't really talk about that. We don't talk about the populations that we have no chance of really de-escalating, whether it's with Dr. John, he has a TEP profile and it focuses on thought, emotion, and behavior. We teach that at Force Science, but for the sake of this, if somebody is too contaminated, for an example, there's literally no ability to connect with them. You could be talking for the next year, not going to help you, right? Same thing, whether it's a medical emergency, a crisis, a mental health emergency, whatever that foundation is. There's no amount of want, hope, Monday morning quarterbacking, hindsight bias, wishing it would have happened is going to make that connection. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about the other side of the population, which is your psychopath population, sometimes some of your sociopaths, people who choose not to. They can choose not to. There are people out there who will not participate in your process, no matter what you do, no matter what you say. Anti-conformist, criminally minded, anti-law enforcement, whatever their mindset is, and they can choose not to. And the expectation that an officer is showing up, and I'm going to say with all this perfect, right, amount of de-escalation training and understanding of human behavior through the lens that gets pushed through the media, there's that expectation that it's always possible. And that's a disservice to all of law enforcement. You can't policy de-escalation. You can ask law enforcement to do your best to try and do it, but I'm going to be honest, we get hurt when we're talking and we should be doing. And the uncomfortable conversation is sometimes a quick, appropriate application of force applied right away. It's the quickest, safest way to de-escalate the problem. And nobody wants that conversation. It ties into what Lon talked about on your last podcast that I watched. And that was violence isn't pretty. You can't put a bow on it, right? Well, you can't take de-escalation and do that same thing. If force is required at that time.
And you know as well as I do, Nicole, I mean, and I think people forget this, the vast majority of contacts out there that first responders, law enforcement make every day do not result in any type of force. But I think what happens is media, this is my biggest beef with them, they get one incident. Now, some of the stuff we've seen in recent years, okay, it's over the top, the officers effed up. But the vast majority of officers go out there every day, make hundreds of thousands of contacts without any type of use of force. Maybe they're going hands-on to cuff and stuff like that, but you know that. So they get spun out of control a lot of times.
Right, but you see headlines that, where people saying things like, well, regardless of this force, regardless of if the force was necessary or appropriate, we shouldn't kill any more people. Well, can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, I hear you. There's nobody that puts on this uniform that should want to go out and kill anyone. Okay, that's not the goal.
Absolutely.
It's out there, and honestly, as goofy as we're not just like capping people for the heck of it. But you're right on the media spin when it is, and then some law enforcement officers have made some very, very poor choices. We can agree on that. But that isn't representation of a whole.
Absolutely.
People get focused where it's bad cops. It's bad cops. I would submit to you that there are bad people who make it into every single career.
Absolutely.
Career. It's
Absolutely.
bad people, not bad cops.
Absolutely. Okay. And with law enforcement, we have a, maybe lack of a better word, target on our back because we have the power to detain, we have the power to take your liberty. We have the power, God forbid, to take your life. So there's more scrutiny on first responders, and there should be. But I agree with you 100%. No cop gets up in the morning, Nicole, kisses their significant other goodbye and says, I'm going to go out and kill somebody today. I'm going to put everything on the line. I'm going to risk losing my house, risk going to prison, risk getting prosecuted, all that stuff because they want to go out and kill people. It's just ridiculous. That's sad is that a lot of people think like that.
They do. You just see global statements, whether it's trolls or how people truly think on social media. It's all about the badge. They're just attached to the badge. That's what makes them. It's all about the power tripping, stuff like that. And that could be farther from the truth, but people have their own perspective, their own experiences, whatever that may be. And it it drives their thoughts. It drives, them, and the media just doesn't help us. I kind of think, what you're doing is critical and, others who are doing this kind of work, because I think we need to be out there pushing the narrative just as equal as the media is.
Absolutely.
We have to be out there educating people. People only know what they know. And this is about
most people get it off TV and the movies.
Right. So if they don't know how the brain works, if they don't understand use of force, if they don't have those experiences, if we don't educate them on human factor psychology, if we don't educate them on the limitations of human performance, that's really the critical part, the limitations of human performance. The badge isn't magic. Science doesn't disappear the moment you put your badge on. And
Absolutely.
People don't really get that. They have this expectation of superhuman decision-making, superhuman athletics.
Well, don't you think, you're an expert in this, Nicole. Don't you think people are, through the years of television and movies, they're just conditioned, okay, the cop can shoot the gun out of the hand or the knife out of the hand and do all these crazy ass shit that nobody's ever seen before in real life because people are conditioned, right? It's like the CSI effect.
Right. Yeah. You come back and you solve a crime within, your 1 hour episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't think
I agree with you.
Hollywood, helps with that because then there's an expectation. People are, I think the last I saw was like a third of shows out there, maybe more, are, law enforcement related, which is good, but it's Hollywood. And the problem is you get people who go in, now they're part of a jury. Now that's their expectations, because like you said, they don't know the realism behind it. They don't know the science behind it.
And to me, that's the biggest thing. And we don't get to pick and choose what science that we want. Science is science. And we can't just, we like this science, we adopt it, but we don't like this. No, we're not going to. That's not how it works with law enforcement.
Yeah.
Brain is brain. Training is training. Science is science. And we need to be just part of pushing that out. And, like, for example, we were talking about having, a VirTra system, when I had just
Amazing.
a screen.
Yeah.
We ran, our town manager through, and we ran our town council through. And, I would submit to anybody who has an opportunity to do that. Like, you change thought process and perspective. I remember running one of the council members through a domestic violence scenario. And he, if for lack of a better word, shot the wrong person, right? He shot who would be the victim just based on some behaviors, and in what a controlled environment, but still a compressed decision making.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he goes, "I just shot the wrong person." And I said, "Yes. So just remember this feeling right here. If something happens within our community or nationally about what happened in that compressed time, is it really about wrong, or is it about, let's look at everything that factored into that narrow window for the officer to make that decision?"
Absolutely.
That's huge. And that's how you build relationships.
Yeah.
It's individual people, educating them. And if they choose not to take it, we've done our best. But for those who just don't know, those are the people we need to build the relationships with, so they understand. But right, it's climbing a big hill with what people are used to, conditioned. Yeah. Right.
And that's why, and it was so funny you mentioned, running some people through the simulations. I went through one, and the audience knows I was with VirTra a couple of weeks ago, and there was a scenario. It was a de-escalation scenario where I went in and I was like, "Oh shit, something's going to happen. Somebody's going to pop out," But it was a gentleman that was sitting there on a lawn chair in an alley, and he was just, going on and on. It was, he had something going on upstairs, you could tell. But the whole purpose of it was so real and so immersive that I was waiting for something to happen. But the whole point of the simulation, it was de-escalation. He was approaching me, and I was using my de-escalation skills. I was using, verbal judo, whatever you want to call it now. And I got him to de-escalate. So it's so important, like Nicole said, if there's an opportunity for people, the listener, to go through one of these simulations with VirTra, do it, because it really opens your eyes, especially civilians.
It's huge.
Where you see civilians like, oh my God, okay, this is what cops are doing every day. They're making those split-second decisions. Split-second decisions.
With, their career on the line, getting criminally charged for what are really mistakes. I mean, we're going to say it's a mistake in a compressed time, a decision, or they're just getting hung out to dry by their department just because it's political, like right, wrong, or different. People don't like that, but it is. A lot of the research, and this is anecdotal at this point, so I just want to make everybody aware of that. But I work, and as do you, with a big, first responder psychologists and therapists and, crisis intervention population.
Thank you for doing that, by the way. That was huge.
And you as well. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, what I see is, people tend to work through their critical incidents at whatever pace, it is for them. But the hang up comes from agency betrayal. Mm-hmm. It's their department. It's the people in their department calling them weak, thinking they should have acted different. Monday morning quarterbacking.
Do you think, and I hate to interrupt you, Nicole, but do you think that that's ever going to change for the better? I think people are more aware now. I think some agencies are getting better with it and actually being more proactive, but we still have a long way to go. In your expertise, in your experience, do you think we're getting better with that? Because I agree with you. Getting better slowly. It's like turning, I want to say the Titanic, but Titanic sunk. So it's like something more positive, right? Something bigger. It's like trying to stop a train track. Right. Or a train, going 100 miles an hour. I think we are getting better. I think there's some fantastic leadership out there. I mean, they are embracing the science behind what is appropriate, but we have to agree that politics plays a part. And when politics play a part, I'm just going to be honest, it serves a social justice lens, and you can't meet a social justice objective. You really can't do that.
It doesn't work like that. That's not how law enforcement works. We work where we can attend to certain things. We can talk about crisis response and mental health and what hat do people want us to wear and what are we doing for suicide intervention, not just for ourselves, but in the community. But the bottom line, when you think about that, that social justice lens sets officers up for failure.
Yep.
And it ties right into people don't like violence. People, they only like it when it's about them and their family. If you do a quick, swift intervention and take care of business and it directly affects them and there is a desirable outcome, hey, they're all high-fiving you. But the bottom line,
but it goes back to what you said, and I agree with you. Look, law enforcement, policing is sometimes violent. It's sometimes dirty. It's sometimes you have to go hands-on. That's never going to change. At least I hope not. No cop, it goes back to what you said, Nicole. No cop wants to go out there and use force. But unfortunately, the world we live in, sometimes you have to use force.
Yeah, unfortunately, our world requires force. That's the bottom line. Unless you end up where, they're taking away what some of our job is, right? You can't stop for this. You can't intervene on this misdemeanor. You can't do that. Which unfortunately creates a more violent society for those people who are living in that environment. And most people especially who live in a high crime area, they
want the cops there.
They want them because they want that stuff reduced. They want a safe environment for their family. And so it is just such a dichotomy when you really start digging into it. It's a tough spot to be in, but honestly, this is one of the ways that we get to reach people to make a difference. I am very lucky. I work with VirTra. I get to teach around the country, working with force science. I'm very, very blessed to be able to, have an audience to pass some of these messages out.
Absolutely.
But 99% of the time, those people aren't the ones that need to hear it. It's others that need to hear it.
Yeah, it's the masses. It's the people. Educating people better. And unfortunately, this with, this is why my irk with social media and, the mass communicative world we're in right now, where information is that, people see a clip, a 15-second, 20-second clip of a OIS or something like that, and then they made a judgment already. Instead of educating themselves and instead of waiting for the facts to come in. And it doesn't help when now you have politicians that are involved and it's political. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was interesting. You and I were having a conversation before we started, and you made a really good point. Thank God that there's still people, brave men and women, who are getting into the field. But a lot of people I talk to, Nicole, and you too, because you said, they don't want to get in law enforcement. They're afraid. Thank God people are still going into law enforcement, but not at the numbers we saw in the past. There's still many departments that are understaffed with no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. And, kind of like I told you, we as individual law enforcement officers have to be advocates for the fact that this is a sacred calling.
Yeah.
We really, really do. We have to be out there and not joke about don't be a cop, be a firefighter. Everybody loves firefighters. Stop, because that falls on ears that may make a huge difference to. This job is sacred. I truly, truly believe that. Like equal to anybody who has military service, when you are willing to put your life on the line, and people start to talk about, like, it's cliche, the service above self. To me, there is no greater calling if you are willing to put your life on the line.
Absolutely.
And you have to talk about that. But we also have to be part of the conversation with whomever asks us, regardless of the political climate. This is a sacred calling, and every day we make a difference. Every day.
Absolutely.
It's a speeding ticket, a warning. If it's a DUI arrest, by God, I know you saved somebody's life, whether it's that person's or somebody else's. Those are the type of things where we get to make a difference. And that scale is very large of all the different types of crime that we can investigate and intercede and intervene. And potentially, like I said, increase those desirable outcomes for individuals, like for communities as a whole. And that's huge. But we also have to push that narrative as well. Hey, there's the education component in science, and there's, by God, like, we have to step up and say, hey, like, if not us, who? If not us, who? Because it is an absolutely sacred calling, and we have to have those conversations with people so they, for lack of a better word, honestly, remember that.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't always like this.
Yeah, it wasn't. And But I'm a firm believer, and I don't know if you are, that you know, the pendulum is always, you know, always comes back around. You know what I mean? I mean, law enforcement, you've done it a long time. I did it. You're still doing it. We have, you know, the peaks and valleys, you know, but it always gets better. Maybe I'm just naive, but it always gets better down the road, right?
The truth is I like to think so, because you're right. The pendulum is not static. It will swing.
Yeah.
Where it's going to end up when it bounces back from where it is right now, that's going to be its own interesting sociological experiment. I think I would just throw that out there. But when it settles down a little bit more, you know, it just kind of goes into the media lens. I don't think people in the communities hate us the way we're portrayed.
No, I think the vast majority of people out there love law enforcement.
You bet. You bet.
I just think that they're afraid to vocalize that a lot for the you know, because they don't, oh my God, he has a thin blue line flag up, you know, that's horrible.
My family will call me
What's that?
And you know, and say, oh, look, hey, you guys shot people in the back again, right? My own relatives.
Yeah.
You know, and then we have an educated conversation and they can take it or leave it, right? But it's the people close to you sometimes don't know, no matter how you do your best, right? But if they're the ones calling and asking and making those judgments, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. Because sometimes I jokingly say when I'm teaching, you talked about use of force and how really overall it's fairly almost infinitesimal, really, when you think about it, right?
Yeah, it's so small.
It's so small. But I jokingly say, hey, at Thanksgiving or Christmas, if you want to have a really fun conversation, ask people how often the percentage you think that they think we use force in law enforcement. And it is no kidding.
80%.
Oh my God, it's horrible. Like
100% all the time.
Right? But I want you to really think about that for a second, because if you let that sit, it's no kidding that there is a disconnect. If people truly thought, even I'll just go with 50% of the time, that we were using force 50% of the time, which is not even close to the case. It's no kidding that people are concerned, but they're concerned with the wrong information.
Well, the numbers don't back that up.
No, they don't. But how are they getting those numbers? It's a thing that you're saying, like the media,
social media, TikTok, friends,
stuff, right? I mean, where those numbers aren't pushed out appropriately. It's just like you talk about 15 seconds of a bad camera angle. Say this 15 seconds looks bad, right? And again, there's my air quotes, because that's all it is. Maybe it's an angle where somebody doesn't have a firearm, you know, same thing. But where's the conversation a couple weeks later or a month later when the full investigation's done and there's 12 more camera angles that clearly show a firearm? No. You know, most people are left with that 15-second window, right, to make a judgment on, we did another shooting, right, from an unarmed individual, and that's not true. But where is the opposite narrative of, absolutely, that's not what we did, and let's discuss it and let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus a separate conversation about if we do shoot an unarmed individual for whatever that reason, and unarmed doesn't mean nonviolent. I mean, there's all these conversations that really, you know, need to be had, you know, far more expanded than just you and I sitting here, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah. And like we were talking about, I think people it's just, maybe it's always been this way, but they get most of their information off television or the movies or now social media, and they just run with it, which baffles me, because we have information at our fingertips. We all know that now. Now you got to vet that information, but just educate yourself a little bit. Not all cops are out there. Most cops, 99% of them are good people. They're out there trying to do a difficult job, trying to take care of their families. They're not out there running and gunning like everybody thinks they're doing all the time. Not everybody, some people.
Right. I mean, you know, like we talked about, there's always sometimes a challenging person ends up in the profession who makes some poor decisions. We can agree on that.
And the thing, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nicole.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if we could segue a little bit into the mental health, because you have a clinical background, and how is this affect? You talk to a ton of people. I mean, you're all around, you're doing trainings, you're talking to first responders. I mean, that's a stupid question, but mentally, the mental health aspect of it, the resiliency, and I know you work with that a lot. This is eating away at officers and first responders, you know, their mental health. They're being able to come back and bounce back when you have, it seems like a lot of people, not everybody, I think the vast majority, like we said, support first responders, But when officers pick up a phone or they look through social media, hear a news report, we're attacking law enforcement again mentally.
Oh, you
That
bet.
has got to take a toll.
And the military, unfortunately, gets the same. And
yeah, military too.
Bad rap from that.
Yeah.
But first responders, you bet. Here, so you and I had mentioned this before we started the podcast, but there's a lot of people who talk the talk and don't walk the walk.
Absolutely.
So now on the opposite end, there are some absolutely fantastic leaders out there dialed in, doing great things, definitely, focusing on, hey, this is not check the box. Because I'm going to tell you right now, what check the box resiliency training does is it gets people killed. It's another bullet somebody's going to eat. I'm sick of check the box training, period. But especially when it comes to resiliency skills and coping skills and any type of, whether it's post-traumatic stress, whatever's on the end of it, this day, disorder, injury, words are pretty powerful. That's important to people. But the bottom line is, we have to be part of doing, showing, having people work through these skills. Even as a therapist, if you call it the civilian population, I don't just sit and talk and go, hey, you need to do this relaxation breathing technique. Right? I don't talk. I mean, like this may help you, but we do it together. We do it together.
Absolutely.
Because how do I know that they know how to do the technique if I don't work with them, if I don't help them through it? And then we see, hey, is this going to work for you? Is this a technique that is going to work? And then they know how to do it. They've done it with me. They understand the benefits of it. And then they can go out and practice it. And practice it not in the midst of a crisis. It's like training any other part of you. You're training your brain, you're training your muscles, you're training. And resiliency skills are that. So this whole talk about resiliency skills does frustrate me because it is implement the skills and have people do the skills. And, trainers need to be part of this because they have to make it okay. The environment has to be okay. If somebody is starting to, chest breathe, they're getting a little jacked up and that adrenaline's coursing through them and they've learned a skill to manage that. I tell you what do you think is going to weigh on their mind? Do I do my skill or do I look like a fool in front of my trainer who thinks I'm weak if I do this, right?
Absolutely.
So this has to be on a lot of different levels. Primarily individual, because we have to be the ones that do the skills. We have to learn them and then do them for ourselves. But we have to create the environment in each of our workplaces where it is absolutely okay to do these. And it is comfortable and it is normalized, just like all the bull crap about being weak used to be the norm. Mm-hmm. And, people are drinking themselves to sleep with all their horrible pictures in their head. That used to be the norm and that used to be accepted. We already know that's not the way to go. Let's put it in practice that the resiliency and coping skills are accepted and it's a comfortable environment for people to be able to experience that they may need a minute after a bad call. And by minute, I mean longer, but they might need to go back to the station and, sit with that
meditate for a minute. Or do something, breathe.
I mean, I'm a big fan of all types of breathing exercise because,
so am I.
Do anywhere, breathe, right? Breathe.
And I'm a big fan of meditation. Now if you would ask me, Nicole, a handful of years ago about meditation, what are you, crazy? Well, you sitting there with your legs crossed and I am all on board with mindfulness and meditation and breathing. And there's a reason why this, that elite military units, sports teams, professional sports teams have adopted mindfulness training, yoga, meditation,
you bet,
breathing, because it works.
It does. But the problem comes in, and I think this is one of the biggest disconnects, especially with let's go with somebody who has unmanaged trauma. Let's just go there. Mindfulness is absolutely fantastic in little doses for first responders. But if they have unmanaged trauma,
absolutely, I agree with
the conversation, because we don't really talk about that. And I tend to see a disconnect with some people who teach sometimes a first responder yoga and whatnot, is that meditation, when you have unmanaged trauma, tends to have some very, very severe rebound effects. And we don't have conversation. So sometimes I think, people who maybe don't have I don't know how you want to put it, a very robust mental health background or in trauma don't understand some of the challenges that come across. Because mindfulness by far, if I could pick like a technique, right, along with like bilateral processing and bilateral stimulation, mindfulness, right, is to be ground yourself, to be present
in the moment.
Because it's really hard to feel anything else except for what you're focusing on in the present, except for those people who their mind's not ready for that.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And with your background, I agree with you 100%. My mindfulness and my meditation became stronger with the foundation I got when I went to treatment for my trauma. And now it is so much better because I had to resolve and I had to attack those, like you said, unresolved trauma before I could be better at it. So I agree with you.
So, but if I could pick, and you see that it's not just even in the first responder population, there's a lot of research about integrating mindfulness-based techniques of some type, and, just to manage just overwhelming emotion. It doesn't have to, for lack of a better word, tip off the deep end into like an absolute crisis, right? But something that's overwhelming. So it's hard to be overwhelmed if you can present focus yourself. So, a lot of times when I go around, I teach very, very quick grounding techniques, things that don't take more than 60 seconds or, to 2 minutes, because that's an opportune window of time for somebody to maybe get grounded for a little while, not have as bad of a rebound effect, but if we don't, again, like, I love the energy you put behind talking about that. You're like, look, like, this is important. And
absolutely. This is the stuff I wish you were around when I was a younger cop, Nicole, to teach me this, because I'll, better, it's better late than never.
Right.
But this is the foundation, part of the foundation that we need to be teaching new officers, the next generation.
Yes.
You need to learn these skills, these coping skills, whatever you want to call it, meditation, mindfulness, because that's going to help you
grounding
during your career, your grounding techniques.
Yep. How to do, I'm a huge fan of EMDR therapy.
I love EMDR.
There's little things people can do to, evoke that bilateral, stimulation. And I from the most part, when I've had somebody come up and say, I didn't have a good interaction, or, it didn't really work for me. Again, this isn't a slam on anybody particular. I always wonder, well, is it because you weren't ready and the practitioner had you engage in something that you weren't ready for? Because that's a conversation too. Sometimes people go out, and, hey, I want EMDR therapy. I want it right now, like, with no consideration for how stable is that person? What, are there going to be additional rebound effects? I get to work with some fantastic people. I work with Dr. Robbie Adler-Tapia, who has probably by far, in my opinion, the best book on first responder resiliency and coping, called One Badge, One Brain, One Life. Ooh,
I like that.
Absolutely fantastic, but it integrates realistic skills that are going to help people get grounded, that do evoke that bilateral stimulation, bilateral processing. Most people are familiar, as I'm sure you, with box breathing, right? Well, you can turn that into a bilateral exercise. If when you breathe, you move your eyes, right? And so, and I can send you some information on that if you want to give it to your listeners, right from Dr. Robbie. But basically you're incorporating, part of bilateral stimulation in that. And then if you pair it with a word, so say that person chooses the word calm, you are literally training your brain to not just, okay, every time I take that breath, or every time I say the word calm, pretty soon all of that's overlapping. And this takes, less than 30 seconds. Once you have practiced it, and we need to practice these skills when we're not stressed. That's a conversation too, as you may learn a skill, practice it with me as a therapist, but if the only time you implement it is when you're super stressed or overwhelmed, it could have some positive benefits. But if you practiced it,
if it's like anything else, if you make it part of your routine,
right?
If you make it part of your routine, it's going to become second nature.
Yes.
And you just build on that. And I like what you said, not just in crisis, but every day you practice it, which is, I do it every day. And it helps me. And for the listener out there, we're not just talking, we're talking professional and personal. And this, Nicole, and hopefully the listener does. If you are not taking care of yourself, if you are not 100% or pretty close to that, how are you supposed to go out there and be effective on the street or whatever you're doing in law enforcement, the first responder field? It's that old, I know it's used all the time, the oxygen mask falls. Okay, you have to put it on yourself first, right? Before you put it on anybody else. But it seems like it's hard to get that through to a lot of people, especially first responders.
It is. And, something to think about too is it can make somebody feel really good to help somebody.
Absolutely.
But when that becomes the primary coping skill in and of itself, it can have detrimental effects as well. If you pour all that energy, again, just like you mentioned, and you turn none of that for you, at some point, there's going to be that rebound effect.
And it's going to manifest.
Oh, you
in
bet.
some way. I mean, through addiction, through abuse, through mental health issues and challenges. It's going to, I don't care how big of a badass you think you are, it's going to manifest. It's going to come to the surface.
Putting our little blindfold on and clicking our heels together 3 times in a place like home doesn't make trauma disappear if that incident impacted somebody, right? Because that's the thing. Everybody is different. Some people are more naturally resilient. I think we can agree on that. Or perhaps they've had exposure in their life where they've got some really dialed in coping skills, and they've learned some good resiliency techniques, but the bottom line is, overall, I think the brain's fantastic. I think most people agree it's got a pretty decent reset button, right?
Oh, it's the
work that we
powerful
do,
supercomputer in the universe.
It gets stuck once in a while.
Yeah.
And it
needs a reset.
Stuck. Yeah. And so can we get it unstuck quicker than not? That's really it. And I think that's huge. And that is what makes the difference, because it frustrates is a very, very mild word for how I feel about this, but there's not one first responder, not one person in the military, and honestly, not one human being on this earth who deserves, if they have experienced something horrible, bad, tragic, the answer is not a crappy life or to eat a bullet. Not one person deserves that. And when it comes to first responders, since we're specifically hitting that population, when you have made the choice of service above self, that you would give your life for somebody else's, the way that you do that shouldn't be you took it yourself. If something happens on duty that was, and I'm just going to go with unavoidable, like that's just what happened. We understand that's the risk of doing our job, but it should not be, and just surviving to me is not good enough. It's not about eating a bullet. Surviving can be a short-term goal. It actually needs to boil down to people thriving. If sometimes we got to take it one day at a time, so we can take it a year at a time. And that's okay. But the goal should be healthiness and happiness, and not
Absolutely.
Where we're rooted right now. And not one first responder deserves any of that. Not one human being. And I say that just, I'm sure you have a listening, audience probably outside of first responders.
Absolutely.
But when you dedicate your life to service, the answer is not suicide.
Yeah.
It might seem like an answer at the time. And I get that, and I get really tired, as you work in mental health, people trying to logic their way out of that. You can't reason with somebody in that mindset. You can't provide them with all these logical solutions. You can hopefully remind them of their coping skills, give them that space to allow for things to change. We talk about in therapy, and we would never say this to anybody out loud. And so I'm telling the audience, please don't say this to anyone. We have a that says no feeling is final. No feeling is final.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we want to provide for people in our role, whatever that is, in first responders responding to it, or as a peer in your department, that's what we're looking for. Can you allow for those feelings to change to something that is more desirable? That's what we have to focus on. But that ties right back to de-escalation when you really think about it.
I was going to bring that back to de-escalation. Yep. I mean, it all comes
back. Allow feelings to change. And that person's doing the work in their head. You're just giving them the safe space to do it. And ideally, there's techniques that work better than not. Like, we've all inadvertently pissed people off. Again, the biggest one.
Well, it reminds me.
Crisis. Go ahead.
And it reminds me of what I heard a long time ago, and maybe you've heard this before. A lot of life is, we all need to learn new things, but a lot of life is unlearning stuff, and learning that uncondition ourselves, or unlearn stuff that we've been taught, or you need to act this way, or you need to show no emotion, or you need to hold things in. We need to unlearn that stuff. And sometimes that means therapy, whatever, counseling. There's no shame in that.
Absolutely not. No
it's like goes back to what you said, Nicole. We have to reset. We have to reset, and it's perfectly fine. But I still think that there's, you say mental health to a first responder. I still think that there's that stigma. In fact, I know there is. Mental health. Well, everybody needs help at some point.
And I like officer wellness, because wellness incorporates a lot. But honestly, when they know what's underneath, they're still a little hinked up. I get it. It's just the same why we have challenges with the post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It's a disorder in the book. Like, that's its name. If somebody receives a diagnosis, right? Like, I can't not diagnose that if that is what it is, because the D's on the end of it and the magic DSM, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean me personally, and a lot of research says it absolutely is an injury, but that's why words are so powerful. People will shy away from a disorder like, I'm just doing my job. Okay, it is an injury. Let's talk about all the studies out there about how the brain can be restored to a healthy baseline with appropriate therapy and intervention. It's no different than a physical injury. And that's really where I wish people could pair it up. Because if you broke your arm in childhood and it was not set right and your arm's all, jacked up, it is going to give you problems throughout your entire life until what? Maybe you see a good reconstructive surgeon and they can fix that problem for you, but it doesn't mean it's painless, and the recovery sure isn't painless. But that's the same with mental health. If your brain is injured, I can tell you this, a lot of people maybe they don't like their therapist because it's hard work. And I get that. Just like people don't like their physical therapist.
Life is hard. Right? Nothing is easy.
No. And
you got to work at it. That recovery journey can be really, really painful. Yeah. But what's at the end of the recovery journey? Diminishment of pain. Yeah.
And that's really, when we talk about keeping our eye on the prize, that's huge. And it's hard. It's hard.
And that's the one thing, getting back to like VirTra and that realistic simulation training, the most realistic I've ever seen. If I have baggage if something is going on mentally, and this is just a sterile environment, it's not live rounds or anything like that. If you got stuff going on up here mentally, it's going to carry into that simulation where it should be instead of out on the field. And that's where I love that type of training, because if something's going on upstairs, not that, shit's going on with me, but that you're going to bring it into that simulation. It's better to work it out there than to be out on the street. You know what I mean?
Yes, but that's where you can normalize your resiliency skills. If
exactly.
Prior to those use of force events, and you taught somebody, whether it's box breathing prior or after, whatever the technique is, you can't really implement box breathing in the middle of something. You can't box breathe while you're trying to drill somebody, right? That's not how it works. Can you teach reset breathing? Can you teach any of those things that helps, moderate and drops that, for somebody? And if you normalize it in the department, in that training environment, especially because you're right, simulated event training is going to create those same physiological and psychological responses. You train it there. If you train it there, they get to practice it there. And then it becomes okay. And then it becomes like, hey, this is like the environment. And you just gave yourself an opportunity to practice, because we skip it. Admittedly, this. We are at the mercy of time and budget for training. We know how much we have to do, but somebody experiences, whether it's live role playing, simulated event scenario, they'll get their adrenaline dump. They got jelly legs going on. And you know what we say?
Jelly legs.
Yeah, have a nice day, right? And we send them on their way with the opportunities right in front of you to go, hey, let's talk about that physiological response. Let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about your psychological acute stress response right now. Let's work through that together.
Absolutely.
And then let's talk about how they implement it the next time. And that is why I told you trainers have to be, I almost would say I think leadership needs to be a huge part of it, but we have to have our trainers and our instructors and our coaches, as part of, buying into this, because they're the ones that are going to have to normalize that training environment to make it okay.
Absolutely. Nicole Florisi, I could talk to you all day. All day. If people want to reach out to you, I mean, we all know that you work for VirTra. Is there any other way that they can reach out to you and get a hold of you?
Yes. So they can email me at VirTra at nflorisi@virtra.com. But I'll be honest, God knows what could happen. I will give you my personal email just because I don't care if people have that, because I want them to be able to reach me no matter what. So my personal email is nmflorisi@gmail.com. And I'm actually happy to provide you my phone number if you want to do like a little package of stuff. People can call me, text me. Honestly, the goal, I'm so blessed to be on your podcast, and thank you so much for the invite.
Absolutely. You're awesome.
I want to be a resource for anybody that needs it. You know, if they're looking for, you know, how to build scenarios and what that looks like and how can they incorporate resiliency training, or they just, you know, part of what I end up doing from the reach I have is just hooking up people with some good therapists or good psychologists across the nation. I've been very lucky.
Shatterproof.
I think we're building new relationships right here.
We are.
Because I think you can agree, having a vetted first responder psychologist or therapist is vital to treatment. It's absolutely vital.
And that's what I love about your background. Not just that you work for VirTra, which is awesome, is that you are a first responder. You have many years of experience. You were acting chief at one point. So you, from the ground up, you have all that experience. And the point in all that is you get it. So when you talk to a first responder who's in crisis, you're going to have that immediate connection right off the bat. And not to mention your clinical background. So that is huge. I don't have to tell you, you know that. It's huge.
Thank you.
In the mental health sphere when it comes to first responders.
Yeah, I'm very lucky with that, because I do, people will tend to talk to me because of that.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't they?
And they know, like, you know, hey, I've been in those similar type of situations, not the exact, that's not how life works, but I can give them some good guidance, and, you know, just, you know, whatever a person needs, I'm happy to try and connect them with services, skills, books, articles, you name it. I'm happy to do anything I can. And thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Nicole Florisi, thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love to have you back on. I could talk to you all day. Everything we talked about, folks, will be in the show notes. Nicole, thank you. God bless.
Thank you.
And I hope to talk to you soon.
As well. Thank you.